Dr. Minette Riordan. This is Painting in Your PJs live with me, Minette. And Painting in Your PJs is all about using art as a powerful tool for personal growth and development. And one of the ways that I approach personal growth is getting more comfortable with making art, with sharing my art, and looking at finding my voice because my art is such a core part of my identity. It's important to me that I like what I'm creating. Now, sometimes I'm okay creating for creating's sake, and it's not as much about liking it. But there are always those moments where we want to feel pride and satisfaction in what we create. And the more confidence that we find on the page, the more I find that that confidence flows over into other areas of our life. So for the month of September, I have decided to tackle botanicals because in my phone, I have literally thousands and thousands of photos that I take. I'm trying to get back to all photos. Leaves. I've taken some pictures of leaves. Hi, Tori. There's a frog, giant zucchini in my garden, but you can just see how much I love taking pictures of flowers wherever I am. Some of these were taken around my neighborhood. These were taken on the top of Trail Ridge Road in Rocky Mountain National Park on the tundra, and they're a couple of inches tall. They're teeny tiny. Same with this one. This is a little yellow blooming flower on the tundra that's like the size of maybe a penny. And so I love getting up close and personal with these different flowers and things that are blooming. And the more I look through my phone, and here I took some pictures, some fruits, so I'm probably gonna grab some, do some fruit at some point this month in my botanicals. But you can just see the flowers go on and on and on and on. No matter where I am or what I'm doing, I'm taking flower photos. Hi, Leslie. Hi, Mommy. Hi, Misty. Hi, Tori. Great to have you all here. So, I wanted to use my own photos as inspiration for drawing, and I encourage you to use your own photos as well, or to find photos that you love and go to used bookstores. Look for flower books, whether they're landscape books or identification books. There are so many ways that we can find those close up photos of flowers to kind of get their shape. But tonight I want to play with, and maybe we'll play with a couple of, like, I loved this one for just getting the shape of the picture, but I really liked this one for the composition of the way the flowers are kind of laid out here and one kind of off to the side. And we've got some nice greens in the background. So I think I might tackle this one and create an art journal page with these sunflowers in the page. And if you missed yesterday's morning's episode, we started just practicing drawing from some of the photos and looking at how, just like we map a face to draw a face, how do we map a flower to kind of get the proportions and those aspect ratios right. So we looked at a few different ways to do that. And I practiced drawing some of them, but then I also had some fun tracing them on tracing paper, which allowed me to really see the shape of the different flowers and to see the mistakes I was making, the tricks my own eyes were playing on me. So we had a lot of fun with some drawing practice yesterday, but I was just itching to get some color down. So I'm going to go ahead and work on the background a little bit with some greens in the background. And I went ahead and traced the shapes just with a pencil on to my paper of sort of the outlines of the sunflowers. I didn't really worry about any of the petals or the background, but I wanted to kind of get a better sense of the layout of the shapes, which will help kind of be a guide. But I also really love painting on tissue like this, or this is tracing paper, painting on tracing paper and then collaging it on to the background. So I have a couple of different ideas for this evening, and as I'm always want to do, I am just going to go for it and see what happens. So one of the things that I'm going to do is protect the rest of my journal pages from getting all stuck together with paint, which I'm really good at doing. So I'm going to go ahead and stick this page under here. And I saw another artist do this, and I'm like, that's brilliant. I'm actually just going to fold that up, just that piece of scratch paper there. And then I end up only getting paint on this page instead of all down the outside of my book. And I grabbed some oil pastels that were sitting on my table, and I want to start in the same way that I always start an art journal page, is just get some marks on the paper and just get rid of the blank page. I think this is such a fun way to just get over the blank page. I've had a very busy work day, lots of coaching sessions, recording educational videos, and so I've been up in my head all day. Since early this morning, I did get up early and do some painting on a commission project I'm working on this morning. But I need to get out of my overthinking head and back into my creative self. Is my sound funny? If my sound is funny, please let me know. Mom, you didn't finish whatever you were starting to say. My throat's a little scratchy today. There's a lot of smoke here today. Apparently, we're getting smoke from fires up in BC. And I've been talking pretty much all day long, so my voice is a little tired. All right, so happy page, just moving some energy, getting that page started. And I want to work really quick tonight, so normally I would take time to maybe mix some of my own paints. But for now, I just want to get some color down on the page. I want to get to those, painting those sunflowers, and I'm looking at my background and I'm noticing the variety of greens and yellows. There's some golds in there. There's definitely some of those deeper shadows behind some of the flowers, so I'm going to want some of those deeper greens. I can always add detail later, and I'm not going to care as much about getting the detail of the background because I want the focus of this page to be these gorgeous sunflowers. And I'm thinking it would be fun to have a quote about sunflowers on the page. I don't have that quote, so that might come later, but I need to just start getting some paint down on the page. One of the things I love about the oil pastels, and that's a very grassy green. That's kind of not the green I'm really going to go for here. Mom, I don't know if I have Brad's cold or if like I said, the smoke outside's pretty bad. I've also been talking pretty much nonstop since about 8 a.m. this morning. Hi, Kayla. Is it smoky where you are? Is it coming west to BC where you are, Kayla? I know we're getting some smoke from fires, but I'm not quite sure where in BC the fires are. And maybe I'm going to use the green to start maybe just putting in some leafy shapes, starting to build a little bit of texture. Well, I'm glad you're not having this smoke there. And I have this wonderful phthalo green that I love. I'm going to see if this one's dried up or not. Some of these are old. For art journaling, I do like to just use up bits and pieces of old paint. I'm kind of liking this red edge around the page and thinking it might kind of frame the image nicely. So that might be even something that I bring back with paint a little bit. And my original image is a rectangle. This one's a square, so I'm going to play with that composition a little bit. This is the first time I painted in this nice sketchbook that my daughter gave me. And we're going to see how the paper is going to do for our mixed media playtime here. And that piece of paper does not want to wrap. It's all good. Okay, so I feel like I've got some greens down there. I've got the page started. Again, I'm kind of liking that sort of bold red line around there. And so I'm probably going to add some more paint here to the edge for now, and then eventually bring that line back. I love mixing my own colors, but I have to say that I have fallen in love with this particular shade of, it's called Hooker's Green Hue Permanent from Liquitex, and it just seems to be a good green for a lot of things. So even as you're using colors right out of the tube, notice the ones that you really like. Buy them in bigger quantity. When you're trying new colors, buy, little small amounts of them to try out. So this is a pretty messy, happy page. And I don't know why, but I really like it. So I'm enjoying that messy, happy page. And I'm going to set this aside to dry. And I'm going to grab this paper here. So again, all I did was to take my image or my piece of tracing paper, lay it over the top of my image. I love tracing paper. It's one of my favorite tools to use in the studio. And all I did was to take my pencil and get the shapes of the flower, get those circles going. It was one of the things we talked about yesterday morning was when we trace over the lines, it helps build muscle memory. We start to see the layout of things and we can get a better sense of where they go, how they go. So we have some interesting perspective. So this photo was taken looking straight ahead at these flowers, but you can see how they're bent, right? They're kind of bent off to the side. But I was super curious about this grasshopper that was hanging out here. And the sunflowers are a little bit on their last legs. We're coming to the end of the summer. These are looking lovingly, hey Mary, looking lovingly chewed up around the edges from all the grasshoppers. This one is still full and beautiful. I also noticed that, I don't know if this is a different type of sunflower or if it's at a different stage of its growth, but I love the detail of this orange and yellow in the center, whereas this one is dark brown and past that little bit of a bloom in the center of the flower. And this one is almost perfectly symmetrical. It's a really beautiful example. I think it's why I took the picture, because it was so symmetrical. But this one, again, visually as a composition for a painting is so much more interesting. So we're going to give it a try and see where we get to. I also thought about doing one that I could add zentangle patterns to, because that would be another favorite thing of mine to do. But I think I'm going to come in and paint this to the best of my abilities. So much of what I want to create on this show is permission to be in beginner's mind. I am making this stuff up Yes, like others, I watch other people's videos. But I practice a lot. I'm always looking for my own voice and style as I go along. And the thing that I am, hi Pearl Ann, welcome, welcome, that I want to just remind you is that we all have to start somewhere. So wherever you are in your creative journey, don't expect yourself to draw masterpieces right out the gate. I don't expect to paint a perfect sunflower, a realistic-ish, because I don't paint anything super realistic, um, but a something that looks like a sunflower on the first try. I think it's so important that we remember that we all have to start at the beginning with our drawing skills. And I hear so many people say, I need a brighter yellow. Uh, well, I can't draw. Well, anybody can draw. Drawing is simply a skill that anyone can learn if you're willing to sit down and do the practice. Oops, I'm sitting on my microphone. I didn't mute myself, did I? Can you guys still hear me all right? So apparently I turned up my microphone. And I'm noticing I have like garlic and tomato splatters because we had early dinner before I got on the call. So I want to create kind of a loose folk art inspired. I love folk art inspired art. And so I want to paint a loose sunflower here, and I just want to practice getting some of these shapes down. And I'm going to kind of just use my brush. I'm not drawing them ahead of time. I'm not going to even pay too much attention to the drawing. I still do have those pencil lines on here. But I want to just kind of dive in here and go for it and see what happens without a lot of judgment, but also without any expectations. Thanks, Tori. Like I have no vision in my head of how I wanted this page to turn out. All I know is that I wanted to paint some sunflowers. And so one of the things that I'm noticing as I'm doing this as these petals along the bottoms are foreshortened, right? From the perspective of looking down on them, these look shorter on the bottom than the ones on the top. And if I were to use my paintbrush to kind of measure the length of the bottom petal versus the top petal, I can see that the top petal is quite a bit longer. And that was why I drew the circles ahead of time, was kind of to capture that. I also want my sunflowers to be kind of really full. Maybe they're in full summer. So even though I'm starting from this photo, I want to take a lot of creative license here and just sort of dive in to the process and the practice. And I'm gonna want some, let's try some of this red oxide. I have fallen in love lately with red oxide. It's a little more red than like a burnt umber or the raw sienna. And maybe we'll get a little bit, no, that's the red oxide too. That burnt sienna is a little bit darker shade. So when we look at the center of a sunflower, hola Blanca, when we look at the center of a sunflower, so when we look at this one, it looks from a distance like it's all one color. Like you look at a field of sunflowers and it looks like the centers of them are all brown. But the closer we get up to them, we really start to see the variation in the color. Let's see if I can focus that a little bit. When I zoom in that close, it doesn't really like to focus very much. There we go. So you can see I've got some of that brighter orange. There's a little bit of yellow in the center. There's some dark brown underneath. And then on these beauties, the colors are even brighter. So a lot more orange with little dots of brown. So starting to see and paint the variations in the color instead of to just have solid color. allows us to capture that center a little bit more realistically. So I'm going to just come in and mix up some of these colors together. And I'm just going to start getting some color down. Again, I'm painting on that tissue paper or that tracing paper, so I don't care about it this much. This is great practice. So if I don't love this, I can, start over and paint right in my art journal page. But it felt like, okay, I want to just start here. I want to capture some color, and it may turn out great and it may not, and whatever happens, it's all good. So when I look at the sunflower, I've got these brighter edges of color with these darker circles in them. So I want to come in with that brighter orange, mix that up a little bit with that yellow. And those colors are too much the same in that light and the glare there. You can barely even see that brighter. So I'm going to come back in with even more of that yellow. Now I'm starting to get that paint on there pretty thickly, and I can really start to build up some of the texture in there, maybe get a little bit of those darks. Probably going to want to brown this burnt sienna up even more. And I'm just going to let my brush kind of do the work to sort of create the idea of the texture in here. Again, we're not trying to make this super, super realistic, but I do want to capture some of the differences in color and texture in these centers. And maybe even bring in a little bit more light around the edges. And so basically I'm just making a really happy mess here to kind of capture the idea of these sunflowers. And again, this is all about just practicing. And I'm going to come back to my sunflowers. So sunflowers, they often look like really beautiful bright yellow. But when you get up close, there's this variation in color and texture and striation of the petals. And we can kind of mimic that with just having some variety in our petals so that our petals aren't just one solid color. Let me zoom that back out a little bit, be a little less glary. So this one feels like that center got really big and dramatic, but that's okay for the moment. We're just going to go with that. And I also want to come in with some of these really bright, bright yellows, because where the light is hitting them, we're getting some of those beautiful yellows. And because yellow is a primary color, you're always going to be using yellow right out of the tube. And so it's handy to have a variety of different shades, tones, hues of yellow in your supply. So I'm sort of just, again, just getting that sense of the sunflowers. I'm not loving, I can see all the pencil lines right now, but that's okay. I'm going to layer this over the top of my green background over there, and a lot of that is going to disappear. We'll sort of collage it on and see what happens. And I've also got these green leaves that I want to paint here. And we've also got, some petals, and we've got a little bit of shadow kind of landing behind. So there's some, dark spaces. It was a very bright, sunny day. So we want to make sure we add in some of those darks as well. And this is feeling very wet and like I need to give it a minute to get nice and dry, or hit it with my dryer and then come back with some of those greens. But I'm not unhappy with these sunflowers. What I'm noticing when I look at the photo is how sharp the edges are and how clear the edges are, and that we can really see the layers. And so I'm going to want to be mindful of that when I get it collaged down to bring in some of those details. And it's where I can also add the folk art element that I love is I could come in with black bold lines and really add a lot of drama to the piece with those black bold lines. So my green paint here is still pretty wet as well, and I don't want to stick that in my nice wet palette over here. But I can kind of get a sense of where this is going to go and what it's going to look like. I'm going to get this all super dry, and then I'm going to go ahead and collage the sunflowers on using matte medium, which is going to make our tracing paper, the parts that I haven't painted, transparent. Like we'll still be able to see it, but we should be able to see the green underneath. It's not as transparent as a deli paper or a tissue paper, but it is transparent. So I got to get this nice and dry here for a minute, and I'd love to hear, how are other people doing? Are you painting along? Are you listening and watching and working on something else? Does anybody have any questions for me? It's always really helpful to hear from others along the journey, so I don't feel like I'm over here talking to myself. So I'm going to take a minute to just get this super dry. I put that paint on there pretty thick. I want to get this nice and dry so I don't smear the painting when I go to collage it on. And I use tracing paper a lot in my work, but I don't think I've ever painted it and then collaged it, so I'm not sure what's going to happen. So we're going to see what's going to happen here. But before I do that, I want to make sure that I've got most of the wet paint blotted off here. Tori says she's making simple, less realistic flowers for a journal page. I love that. And I'm just looking for a little bit of scrap paper here. So I just want to blot any extra paint off of this page, so when I go to put that matte medium on there, I don't get all the green on top of my tracing paper. So I still had some big blobby bits in there. And we're going to see if we can get those dried up. I'm going to do the same thing with my sunflowers. Again, my goal is just to get those last little bits of extra paint off of there so they don't smear where I don't want them when I go to collage this all down. And of course, everything is paint overable, so if it's not perfect at the end, that will be fine as well. And I think what I want to do is I'm going to cut off some of the extra paper here because I want as much of my green background to show through and around. And I really just want the flowers. So Leslie says she's working on a Sacred Circle watercolor. Nice. I love it. You're working on your sacred circles. So sacred circles are what we call geometric mandala designs in our monthly Sacred Circle membership community. And I am missing coloring my sacred circles. My daughter gifted me an absolutely adorable little embroidered cat, and so I have been working on some hand stitching in the evenings. Okay, I'm thinking this is going to work. It's going to be a fun experiment. And last week we did a watercolor sacred circle here on our first evening Painting in Your PJs live. And you could also simply be practicing drawing sunflowers or look online for some sunflowers to copy because it's nice to have a photo to start with. So you can see how as I add the matte medium that tissue paper is becoming more and more transparent. Because I've already painted on it, it's a little wrinkly, which is going to, I think, just add to the gorgeous texture of our watercolors. And I just want to make sure that I'm just sealing that paper down in there nicely. And by the time I'm done, we won't see the edges of the paper at all. Ideally, that's my goal. And I apologize for the glare. That matte medium is super shiny, and this time of the evening there's not much I can do about the glare, but you can see only a little bit of that paper remaining. And now it feels like I've got nice darks on my sunflowers and I can go back with details. But first I think I want to come in and work on some of these greens some more. Down to the bottom of that one, which is definitely a favorite. This is an Amsterdam olive green light, one of my favorite greens. And some of that hooker green. Probably getting way more paint than I need, but it'll just get painted onto something else before I am done for the evening. And I'm probably going to want just a few little more spots of this nice dark green as well. This is a phthalo green yellow shade. You can also get a phthalo green blue shade. So again, I'm going for abstract, not real, but this is going to help me come in and just get some of those darks in the grasses around the image. I'm okay if I paint over some of that flower. I'm going to bring all of this back with more paint, but we're going to start with the darks. So when we're working with acrylics, it's almost the opposite of working with watercolor because you start with your darks. That's our nice bright leaf there. And you build up to your lights. So you always have the opportunity to brighten things up, whereas in watercolor you work the opposite. You work light to dark. So it feels like we've got some darks happening on the page, some more texture starting to kind of build up some of those layers. That tissue paper is starting to disappear a little bit. But I've still got the shapes of my flowers, so I know the direction of going. Well, thank you, Leslie. I appreciate that. It's coming together. And it helps that I started with just the outlines of those circles. So I'm going to work on this little guy over here. And we can see a few little just kind of dried up orangey yellow leaves and the bright green underside of the flower. And even the stem is really bright yellow, bright green, but in the picture it's in the shadow of the other flowers. But I want it to stand out, so I'm going to take a little bit of creative license And I'm going to need some white paint, which I think hopefully did not all end up on the other table. It did not. Awesome. Are you loving your gouache, Blanca? Are you having fun with your playing with your gouache? Gouache would be really fun to paint these with. And so I'm going to want these bright greens to really stand out. People have been following me for a while. I do this trick all the time where I'm going to come in with some white first, and then I'll come back over that white again with the brighter colors. But if I want those colors to be really nice and bright, I'm going to add a few more layers here. And some of these are going to be those little petals that are just kind of sticking up, and then some of them will be the leaves. All right, and I think I'm going to do that over here. So I painted over my green leaf. Again, I think I want that to be a little bit bigger, and it's going to be the leaves of the sunflowers are beautiful bright green. And they're not particularly straight. They have pretty jaggy edges. So we'll just get those leaves in place. So the last thing I'll do is touch up our sunflowers, because we really want them to be in the foreground and everything else to be in the backgrounds. So we'll start in with some of the other bits and sort of grow it from there. Awesome, taking advantage of the deeper light colors. Yeah, I love how they do give you some great options. I could spend a whole month painting sunflowers. I absolutely love sunflowers. Okay, that is looking better. And I'm seeing from looking at this where, there's a few more leaves kind of tucked behind that maybe I didn't notice, that will bring out just a few more of those leaves in our design. Again, just taking some of that creative license to create a composition that's sort of pleasing to my eyes. All right, looking good. And because I live in Colorado and it tends to be really dry here, my paint dries really fast. So now I should be able to come back in and start to layer this up with some of those brighter colors. And I'm okay if some of the white shows through too. Again, this is a practice page. My effort and energy is being spent on just the practice of the shapes and the angles and the layers. And again, I'm happy that I started with the tracing paper, because it just kind of gave me a little bit more of a direction. And Miss Georgia wants to come say hello. You want to come up? Come on. Georgia says hello to everyone. So again, I'm coming in, just adding some of the texture, bringing in some of those lights again. Probably pop some more, color over and around these. And then I'm also feeling like I want to start to just really brighten up my leaves quite a bit to give them some of that crisp feel. Yeah, Georgia's decided she's going to help paint here. You're so helpful, kitty cat. She always decides that she needs to lie, and I'm not being patient to wait for that green to dry, so I'm getting some green in my petal there. She needs to be half on the table and half in my lap so that she's literally right smack in the center of everything. So I'm just noticing the different shapes of the petals. They're not all perfect. Just feels like I need to brighten the whole thing up, and then I will come back in with just continue to layer up these colors until I kind of create that look and the effect that I want. And noticing these petals kind of layer over the flower behind. There's that funny skinny one in there. And the main thing is just remembering to keep these ones on the bottom much shorter. Yes, I see you. All right, Missy. Nope. Sorry, guys. You're not helping. Off you go. And the same thing here. We've got these bottom ones. I can still see my pencil circle there a little bit, but these bottom petals are significantly shorter than the ones on the top. From the angle, we want to try to capture that angle. And these are actually over the top of that one there, so we can stretch those out. So I'm loving the variations of color and texture, and I'm loving the collaged bits of paper in there because they are also just kind of adding to that sort of layered effect. I'm going to bring a little more color in. And this is the part where for me it's super fun just to play with the color, try things on, see what they do. If I don't like them, everything can get painted over. That's getting a little too brown, so not loving that. This one felt like it needed a little more texture. I want to see all of that texture in the center. The centers of the sunflowers need some of that dark brown. So one of the last things I'll do is go into those centers and add some of that variety. But now at least I have a little more paint and texture, a little more light and interest. And this needs to, again, those yellows need to get dry, and I'll come in with those final details. And now that white should be dry enough, I can come in and bring back and brighten up some of those leaves. Because we really want those leaves to, again, stand out from the rest of that crazy background. Give them a little texture, and I love to use the paint really thick to start to build up some of the texture and shape of the leaves. This paintbrush is a little too thick, so it's not getting quite right in the lines where I want it. They are really coming to life. Thank you, Tori. And I know it's kind of glary. Again, this time of night, the glare makes things a little bit harder to see, but it does feel like they're coming to life, and everything just needs to have some detail added and be sharpened up a little bit. So I'm going to hit this with the dryer again, get it nice and dry, and then I'm going to come in just with one more one more layer and maybe a few fine-tune details and call it done for the evening, right? Because it's, again, it's not about perfection. I can see me getting caught up in really messing with this, right, for hours and hours. Thank you for being here, Blanca, as always. So appreciate you. And this also feels like, I'm wondering if I just move that, let that, it'll be a little bit, there we go. Maybe that'll be a little bit less glary. This is also feels like a great point to do our favorite trick of taking a photograph and then looking at that photograph in our phone. I'm going to go edit and I'm going to edit the color and I'm going to make that black and white so I can see where my lights and darks are and where I need to. So I don't have any super dramatic darks and it feels like the value between the petals and the leaf is the same. I want to change that up a little bit. And I definitely need a little more dark behind and in the centers of my sunflowers. So this helps me understand some of the steps that I need to take next. And I'm curious if I went through that same process and took a photo or took the photo of my photo or went back to my original photo would be the smart thing to do. And I did that same thing. Look how dark the darks are. Look how dark the darks are around the edges. And it's those darks that create the contrast and make that foreground image really pop out. I can see the dark detail in the centers of the flowers. So it shows me where I have work to do. So I think it's important to make sure that we take those extra steps, right, to really use the image to see those lights and those darks. And so I'm wanting to start with bringing back just maybe some of those darks. And I am looking for, let's try this brush. So I'm going to come back with some of that really dark green, but then I'm going to mix a little bit of these redder colors into it and just mix up. I got paint everywhere. A little more dark olivey green. I have more paint on my fingers, I think, than I do anywhere else. Okay, it may not be the right brush, but this is going to allow me to just sort of carefully come in here and darken up around the edges of things. To kind of get them to pop out. I don't want to outline them. I want to use the paint to create just with that little bit of shading under there of that little bit darker green. Notice how much all of a sudden the edges of my leaves are really starting to pop out. It's amazing what just that little bit of shadow can do. And your tendency might have been to add a little bit of black to that green to kind of darken it up. But I want to use the colors on my palette as much as possible. And one of my friends who went to art school said they taught you could never use black out of the tube, that you always had to mix your blacks from your other colors on your page. And so ever since she told me that, I'm working at getting better at mixing my own colors. And I love the just that extra drama that black creates or that dark color creates. And it doesn't mean the whole thing needs to be that dark, but we can just have those darker edges blended in there, and all of a sudden it makes that image just that much more bright and pop out. I love finger painting. I was talking to a client this morning about the joys of finger painting. It's so good for you to get your fingers into your artwork. All right, so way better on the darks. All of a sudden this guy up here is popping out in a way he wasn't before. It wasn't before. I don't think sunflowers have gender. And this sketch paper in this journal is holding up pretty nicely. So it's certainly not a perfect painting by any means. They're not perfect sunflowers, but it does feel like they look like sunflowers, right? Like, so I'm pretty happy with that for my first time out the gate, painting something that looks, a little bit more realistic than what I normally paint. And I'm going to come back in one more time with our yellow here. We'll brighten up our yellow a bit. And again, we're just going to bring back the shapes of those leaves, incorporate all those layers of colors underneath. And just being patient and adding layer after layer after layer is what's going to create that magic on the page. And I feel like they still probably need some little bit more of the white around the edges to brighten them up. Let's get a little small brush going. So I want to just bring a little more definition into some of these areas. Not necessarily outlining everything, but again, just creating a little distinction there, helping them pop out, maybe imagining if that sun is sort of, shining down directly on them. And I want to work on those centers to get those centers popping out a little bit better. So I'm going to use this same dark greeny brown that I already mixed up over here, but I'm going to add a little bit more of that red oxide, make it even maybe a little bit more brown. Thank you, Pearl Ann. Thanks, Mom. Yep, it's definitely coming together here. And I got all the paint on my brush. So it feels like I want to come in here and just add some texture. Because when we look at those sunflowers up close, they have the most beautiful texture in the centers of them. And again, I'm adding a lot of dark here, and I'm probably going to go back and with this tiny brush and add a little bit more light to each of them as well. But this is going to help me start to build up that texture a little bit more. I keep saying the word texture because when I think of sunflowers, they have a tremendous amount of texture in the petals and in the centers as well. And I think I want some more of this nice. This is a very classic. This is just, it's called primary yellow, and to me it's just that really brilliant lemon yellow. And I want to just bring some little spots of that. And so it takes patience to get all of these layers going, to get the lights how we want them and the darks how we want them. And so when you're painting and you're getting frustrated, maybe walk away, come back, take your time, slow down. I don't know if you noticed, I must have used 5 or 6 different brushes on these as well. Like finding the right shape of brush so that the brushes are doing a lot of that work for me. These feel like they could still use a little bit brightening up, a little more of that lemon yellow to really make them pop. And what's missing are the lines in the center of the petals. So I'm definitely going to want to come in and give them even a little more definition. I definitely don't want my petals to have the green showing through, so I might have to work a little bit at in a few of those places where I've got some overlaps there. Okay, I feel like I'm getting close. Like it just it takes what it takes, right? And so I'm not at the point where I feel like I'm getting fussy with it, but I'm definitely at the point where I'm getting close and probably needing to walk away. And I don't know if I can get this to focus in enough to, it just does not want to focus that in that close. So this one, it's easier to see these gorgeous lines. Like there's so much texture in the petals of these leaves, and I want to capture some of that texture. So I'm going to come in with a little bit of this orange. And just start to add in some of those lines. And if it gets too orange, I'm going to go back in one more time with the yellow. What I'm loving is that the texture, it feels like the wrinkles in the paper are kind of adding to some of the texture of the flowers. And put a little bit of that orange over there, and we've got just a couple of these little bits of petals standing out on that side. And I'm not seeing as much detail on this flower because it's kind of pointing away from me. Aw, thanks, Kayla. I so appreciate that. I learned a lot from this session too, because this is just so much about practice for me as well, and not about perfection, but just about really starting to kind of lean in, experiment, and play. So the very last step here is to get some of that same texture into our leaves. So when we look at the leaves, they have a pretty white vein in them, a pretty dominant vein down the center of the flower, and it's kind of a whitey yellow in the light. So it would be easy to just make those dark and think, oh, those are really dark, but it's actually not. It's pretty white in the center. I think I want it more white, maybe even a little bit of green. So when I look at them, they're kind of that, they're not white white. And I shouldn't be using this little tiny brush to mix paint with, but I am. And I've been really looking at leaves. I took a bunch of leaf photos up close on our picnic on Monday and noticed how some leaves, the veins in the leaves are so symmetrical and others are asymmetrical, but nature is pretty magical. I love these detail-y bits, and normally I would want to come in with my poscas and draw these bits to make it easier. I find it much more challenging to work with a tiny brush. If you've ever looked up closely at the stem of a sunflower, they're actually quite pokey. And it's harder to get, exactly the lines I want. So it sort of forces me to kind of let go of any perfectionism here. And I'm just going to kind of come in and clean up the edges of those leaves. I love the very beginning of the painting, and then these final details always feel quite joyful. So for a first effort at painting some semi-realistic sunflowers, they're not too shabby. I'm not feeling any judgment about them. I can see where I still have work to do or things that I would want to change about them. But for now, it's a great place to start. It's a beginner's painting. I am a beginner at painting realistic things, so I just want to be happy with that. So this one over here just feels like I didn't get the green parts in the center of the brown part. That feels a little bit better. But I think I'm going to call that done for now. A great first effort. I do think I want to come back maybe with that red oxide and paint that little frame around the edge and maybe find a little bit of a quote. But for now, it's time to step away, let it dry completely, and it'll tell me what it needs next if I'm patient enough to listen. That's for me part of that intuitive process and growing as an artist is knowing when to walk away and let it rest and when to push through to the next level. But right now, it feels like it's time to take a break. So thank you all for joining me. Super grateful if you join me live. If you're watching the replay, thank you, thank you, thank you. So appreciate you taking the time to tune in. Please hit the like button on the video, subscribe, check that little bell so you get notified when I go live or add new content to the channel. As always, I appreciate you being here. I'm Dr. Minette, and this is the PM edition of Painting in Your PJs Live with Minette. Have a beautiful rest of your evening. Good night, everybody.